Okay, my name is Tiffany Dowell-Lashmet. I'm an Extension Agricultural Law Specialist with Texas A&M. I'm here today with Dr. Justin Benavides, and we're going to talk about the new interim final rule related to hemp production that was released by the USDA this week. This is an interim final rule, which I know sounds a little bit contradictory, those two terms.
It's one of those legal things, right?
I'm sure it's the lawyer's fault.
Yep.
That's right. And so it'll be in place for the next 2 years. We'll follow this rule. One important thing is that they are taking comments as far as what people think about the rule, potential changes that they may make after that 2-year period. And so I would encourage people who are interested in this topic, who may be considering producing hemp, if there are things in this rule that you have comments on, you'll have 60 days from when this is published in the Federal Register to make those comments. You can do that on the USDA website. So we think that that is really important. But like I said, this interim final rule sets out the USDA rules for at least the next 2 years related to hemp production, and we think it's going to be important for producers to be aware of this rule.
But so this does not mean that we can go out today and plant hemp seed. There's not even really a certified hemp seed available in Texas right now. So hold on, everyone. Don't go start digging furrows or anything like that. We've got to wait a little bit longer, and that's because we're waiting on TDA's rules to be finalized and submitted and approved, correct?
That's exactly right. Yeah, we've got a lot of, row to hoe, as my dad would say, before we are ready to be planting, hemp seeds and producing in Texas, and for agronomy reasons as well. It's the middle of winter, I guess. But so the way that the federal rule is set up is it sort of gives instructions to states or tribes if they want to create their own state level or tribal level production plan. And it tells them sort of what has to be contained in that plan. That's about half of the rule. The other half of the rule is developing a USDA, department level plan that will be imposed in states that may choose not to develop a state plan. So that's kind of the second half of the rule. Texas will be putting in a state plan. TDA is going to be working on that, Texas Department of Agriculture. They're going to get that sent to the USDA fairly soon, and so we will have a state-level plan. Until that is approved and in place, though, again, still no producing hemp here in Texas.
And so we'll be subject to the rules that are set forward by TDA whenever they are put forward, correct?
Good, that's exactly right. And the USDA rule just sort of tells TDA, here's some things you need to include when you're working on that.
And so one of the things that the rule sets forward, which has been in public knowledge for a long time, is what hemp actually is. And so hemp, as set forward by the 2018 Farm Bill, is any sort of cannabis plant that has a THC level of less than 0.3%. Now, THC is tetrahydrocannabinol. It's the psychoactive ingredient that causes you to get high from marijuana. If the THC level is lower than that, whenever you produce your hemp plant, it is considered industrial hemp. Now, that level applies when the plant is growing and after it is harvested. So it applies all the way through the plant's cycle until it is processed. And so there's a lot of different uses for hemp. Hemp was grown historically in the United States for rope, different food ingredients, as different fibrous materials. It can be used in a variety of things now. It's still in food ingredients. It's actually legal to be in cosmetic products and food. It's just not legal to produce in certain states. But that's kind of what hemp is as far as what the 2018 Farm Bill defines it as.
Okay. So this USDA rule that came out sort of addresses 7 different issues as far as what needs to be included in a plan like the one that TDA is working on. It's a 161-page rule. We're not going to cover all that today. You're welcome. So instead, we're going to spend some time hitting kind of the high notes on the rule, especially as it relates to things that I think people that are considering producing hemp are going to want to know. The first thing is, if you're going to produce hemp anywhere under a state-level plan, the state has to provide for there to be information given by the producer to the state to let them know about that field. And so one of the things you have to do is tell them the exact location of your field. There'll be a legal description as well as geospatial coordinates to that field, so they will know exactly where all the hemp is that's being grown in Texas. Another requirement that's going to be in place is that anyone who's going to grow hemp has to report that to the Farm Service Agency in that county. And so, for a lot of farmers, that's not a big deal. They already deal with the FSA on a number of different programs. For people who may be new getting into production, that is going to be a requirement that you do have to report it to that federal agency. A big part of the rule deals with sampling and testing for that THC level that Justin mentioned. That's going to be a huge issue when you're looking at hemp production. A few highlights from the USDA rule. The first one, Justin, we've talked about this several times, is this 15-day testing window prior to harvest.
Right.
And so when you're ready to harvest a crop, you've got 15 days to get the samples collected, get them tested for that THC level. And that is one specific topic that USDA is asking for comment on from folks. That 15-day timeline, is that long enough? Is it too short? Is it, too long? Whatever. But one of the reasons they have to limit that is because that THC level in the plant can change as time goes on.
Yeah.
Another thing that they're looking at as far as testing, the rule requires that tests be performed by a DEA kind of certified laboratory. They're requesting comments on that as well. They list some other potentials that they may look at as far as that goes in the rule, but that's something that could have big impacts on where testing can be done and how many DEA-approved testing sites may exist. At the lab, as far as the tests that are going to be run, it has to be a post-decarboxylate test, which this is not my area of expertise, but I've been told that what that means is they're going to look not only at the THC, but also at the THC acid that can then turn into THC. And that's a very specific test, and my understanding is that was something folks were maybe not aware of coming down the pike. But for now, at least subject to them taking those comments and potentially changing this rule in the next 2 years, it will be that type of test.
And another interesting thing that came as part of the rule that we weren't really made aware of prior to its publication is an allowance for a margin of error in THC testing. So the prescribed THC level, kind of the maximum before it becomes designated as a controlled substance, is 0.3% THC. Now, if you go above that, so let's say your THC content is 0.35%, but the margin of error is 0.06, which would put you at a possibility of 0.29% THC, you're not considered a hot crop. And under this interim rule and the 2018 Farm Bill, you won't be subject to those certain penalties for THC. Now, there might be other implications under other laws,
Sure.
But as far as this is concerned, you will not be subject to the penalties of a hot hemp crop. And that is kind of one of the things that was very unique about this rule that we weren't aware of prior to its publication.
So when they do the test at the DEA laboratory, they're going to test for the actual THC level, and then they're also testing for that margin of uncertainty, or as Justin described it, margin of error. And so you're going to get both of those when you get that report back. That gives a little bit, at least, of kind of wiggle room or room to breathe as far as that THC test goes. And like you say, that was something we weren't aware of. So what they're going to be looking for as far as whether or not your crop is hot or falls within the rules is the acceptable hemp THC level, which again is 0.3 within that range of the margin of error. And I think that's going to be really important. The next point that the rule talks about is enforcement. And so if there is a problem, if you are violating the rules that are written by your state in some way, how does enforcement proceed? And there was some interesting information there. The first thing is if you do something that is considered negligent, and negligent is defined as not acting as a reasonably prudent person would act. They're under the rules, if you're negligent, they're going to put you on what's called a corrective action plan to fix the problem, and then you go forward. You don't face any criminal penalties for negligent violations. You just get put on that action plan. Some examples in the rules of negligent violations are things like failing to have the required license to produce hemp, failing to report your acreage or your location. Those are the types of negligent violations. Now, if you have more than 3 negligent violations in 5 years, then you will no longer be allowed to produce hemp. So that is important. Now, if you do something that is a culpability level higher than negligence, so something like intentional or reckless, or you have to sort of have some sort of awareness of what you're doing is wrong. That's where there can be really serious criminal penalties, and the rule requires that that be reported to local, state, and federal law enforcement agencies. One other note that I want to make on this enforcement is there's sort of a safe harbor provision in there that I found really interesting. And what that says is if you're a producer and you grow hemp that is over that 0.3 limit but under 0.5, right? So it is a hot crop. It is going to be subject to destruction under the rule. We'll talk about that in just a minute. But if you're between that 0.3 and 0.5 level and you use reasonable production practices, there's a safe harbor here that says it's not negligent to do that. So they sort of give producers a break there, right? We're not going to say that you're negligent even if you produced a hot crop if you're lower than 0.5 THC and you've used reasonable production practices. I think that's really important for producers as well. Now, we've talked about hot crops.
Several times.
What happens if you have a hot crop?
So you're subject to the penalties of largely loss of your crop. So they will come in, and there are different methods that are prescribed, but you will have to destroy your crop. And the implications for insurance are unclear at this time. I'm not really sure about the implications for insurance, but you could be subject to loss of your entire crop and the financial resources that you put into that crop as well.
Well, and one thing to say there too, as far as destruction goes, it's not as simple as you just go in and plow it up, which that would be bad enough. Like you say, the economic impacts of that would be huge. But it has to actually be disposed of in accordance with the Controlled Substance Act and DEA regulations. The reason for that is if it's over that 0.3 THC, it's marijuana. And so it's an illegal substance. You have to dispose of it in accordance with those laws using law enforcement or other certified individuals, which that's going to be, more of an issue than maybe we foresaw before we looked at the rule. The last thing that I want to raise as far as the different provisions in the rule is having to do with certified seed. Because of the differences in seed that may work in different regions of the United States, because of geographical differences, weather differences, the USDA says they are not going to create a federal certified seed system for hemp seed. That'll be something done at the state level. Currently, as you noted before, in Texas, there is no certified seed program for hemp, but that is something that may be coming down the pike.